Hello everyone, so here we are at the third video and it's going to be much shorter than the others. I'm done talking about the sample essay and breaking down some guidelines based on its structure for you to think of. So now I just want to explain the homework that you're working on, which is also outlined on the website. Basically, you're going to be completing the outline. You don't have any more reading that I expect you to do until the day that you return back to campus, hopefully. So here we go, the homework essay outline, a couple of pointers I have for outlining. So first of all, be sure you're integrating pop culture throughout the paper. Obviously, what you're submitting is not the paper yet, it is just the outline. But I want to make sure that in the thesis and in the supports and oppositions, you have a vision that is clearly not just looking at culture itself, but is looking at pop culture, right? Some of you guys inherently in the topic you've selected, it's already about pop culture. If not, then you need to make sure that you're tying that in, right? Keep in mind on the prompt my contrast between looking at legalization of marijuana in general and making an argument that ties legalization of marijuana to Netflix. So I need to see specific focus, even in your outline, that shows me you're going to be researching and interpreting pop culture. The second point, make sure that you're developing a complex cultural critique based on your argument. That the whole point of doing the support and opposition is to say something with creative vision about culture. Third point, there should be as much variety as possible within the supports. For some of you, that means adding a third support. So I'll go through this when I show you the example in a moment. You should have between 2 and 3 points of support and 1 and 2 points of opposition. And it's up to you what those will be, but keeping in mind the 7 to 10 page requirement, I often suggest a third point. It really depends on how much you can interpret and how many examples you're used for each, but it also allows to have more creative variety. And that leads into the next point, be creative. Don't go for the standard arguments we always hear about your topic, right? If you've chosen a topic that's rather familiar, you need to find your unique and creative vision about it. It's not about just regurgitating what your sources are saying. It's really about creating your vision and then finding some sources that go along with it. So keep that in mind. You don't have to find the most common support and opposition. You need to find some that are unique and that are culturally significant. The last one here, you decide if you want to start with support in your structure or if you want to start with opposition and go into support. SOLG starts with opposition, so I'll show you what this looks like, but there's much more leeway in your choices and how you want to organize your argumentative points here. So I have an example based on SOLG that's on the website. I'm going to open that up now to show you guys, and you can check it out later as you're working on yours. There's also a couple more student models under the next class, but for now, right under the videos from today, we have the sample outline. And as you can see here, I have my standard notes that are kind of breaking it down. So this is just kind of going backwards. You've already looked at the final product of the essay, and now I'm showing you, this is just my interpretation of if SOLG had begun with an outline, it would probably look something like this. So the thesis here, while recent ads of interracial families appear to be counter-hegemonic and reflective of increased embracement of diversity, they are in fact inspired by motives that are less than progressive. For those of you that I met with last week, we talked about this idea of the thesis not needing to spell everything out already. So my note here, it's not necessary to list all of your supports or even the opposition in the thesis. Simply state your complex argument. It's particularly confusing for an argument essay if you set up the opposition in your thesis, because then we're not going to be sure which side you're on. So stay focused on your support. You don't need to list all the reasons. Just give us the broader support point. For the body, so these are some things that are really important for the structuring of this essay. It's a longer essay, but I want you to stay focused on the present. So I'm asking for you, after your introduction, to do a brief background. It functions in a similar way to those denotative descriptions of the compare-contrast essay. It's where you're getting everything we need out of the way so that you can just focus on analysis later on. So I'm asking for 1 to 2 paragraphs, no more than a page of background, in which you provide, as I've said here, context and key vocabulary for your topic, right? So it might be a little bit of historical context on whatever your topic is. It might be defining some key terms. So if I broke down what SOLG is doing, she provides a definition of hegemony, and then she also is giving us some context on the targeting of minority groups in advertising, which is really useful context before we get into her points. So, after your background, this is where you're laying out your support and opposition. Of course, the oppositional point from SOLG's analysis is some argue that the positive family narrative in both ads should be celebrated as counter-hegemonic. So note my setup here. Some argue, this isn't the exact way SOLG phrases it, but it's the way that I like to see this done in an essay because this suggests that it's the opposition, right? Some argue means this is not my perspective, this is what other people say. And so some argue, many believe, a common perspective. Again, it's saying this is not my perspective. So my note here, it begins with opposition in this outline and then goes to support. You could follow this structure, or you could have done the opposite and begun with the support. It really depends on what you need for your own purposes. It's more standard to actually begin with support, but I liked the creative vision of opposition because SOLG does a really strong explanation of her opposition, which is something to keep in mind, right? As I mentioned earlier, we actually think initially that she's on the side of the opposition, and then we realize that this is not something she agrees with, but she takes a lot of time giving that perspective. However, refutation is required also, right? So the refutation here, while this is true and should be celebrated, that narrative is forced and insincere. So you can have up to 2 oppositional points, but the whole goal of the opposition is to shut it down. Otherwise, we're not going to know which side you're on. So keep in mind, this would be 1 paragraph in your essay. You could separate it if you like to, but when you have the oppositional perspective, you need to include an opposition. Very briefly, going over the supports, which we already discussed. Support 1, a separation of the couple in the ad suggests a lack of full embracement of counter-hegemony. Support 2, additionally, the advertiser's defense of a loving family over an interracial one amidst backlash shows their real motivation to be money, not activism. Talk through that. The third one we didn't really talk about, but it's very present in the article. Finally, not only do the ads condone hegemonic thinking regarding racial dynamics, but they reinforce a traditional gender narrative as well. So there's a portion in the article or the essay where she talks a lot about how the use of this hegemonic thinking is not only in regard to the racial dynamics, but it also ties into the female characters who are kind of isolated as these mothers in the kitchens that are just there to support their husbands. So another solid point that could be used to say this is just based on a narrow perspective. So after my 3 supports here, conclusion, right? I'm not going to talk too much about this now, but I already mentioned in the previous video that the conclusion needs to have a strong and unique and creative vision. So the note here, there's an opportunity for the media to also help drive social change when it comes to advertisements like Cheerios that feature interracial couples. So this is just kind of a setup for that whole hashtag vision that the author has. So final notes here, you should have 2 to 3 support, 1 to 2 opposition. Each individual point needs to include research insight and pop culture examples. So this is very important. Obviously, this second point is more just about moving ahead to the essay, but just keep in mind, whatever your points are, you should be able to back them up with research support, and you should be able to include examples as well. So keep that in mind as you're deciding what to focus on for the outline. And again, I just want to guide you toward looking at the student models which are here and above, right? That the assignment you're doing for Monday is going to be completing an outline along these lines. These 2 have more standard structure, so do be sure to check them out. So now what you should be focused on is going into your reading response, which is not really about the article so much as just preparing for your own paper. I've asked you to write just kind of a 1-page reflection that could become your introduction that's really about how you have a personal take on your topic. It doesn't have to be that you have had the specific experience that you're interpreting, but I want you to think about how you can make this final topic personal to you in a unique and creative way. So I ask you to take just 15 minutes to complete it. You should be working on that now and then sending it my way. So enjoy this. It's all about really having a personal investment in your final paper. Thank you very much. I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.